Dapper Don's here to make you smile with a co-host sharp and riff so true. We've got the laughs, the rants, the view. What's going on? Oh, what's the word? Indy's the city where we'll be heard. From Monument Circle to Broad Ripple on. What's going on with Dapper Don? So grab your coffee, Hoosiers, and let's get to it. 'Cause we're in the house!
What's going on? It's Dapper Don, and I'm excited to welcome you all back. So, over the last couple of weeks, I've brought on a couple of authors who write in the dark fantasy genre. Admittedly, it was kind of random. If I gelled with some dark aspect of the human experience that they shined a light on with their work, I naturally brought them on to talk about it. And one thing I noticed about these authors' opinions on fantasy in general is that they felt that the modern version of fantasy with happy endings and love triumphing over all was unrealistic. One of them in particular resented the escapism that some fantasy likes to provide. They wanted to hit readers right where it hurts with their stories, even with themes of love. And while I agreed with a lot of these takes, there's two sides to every argument. So I introduce you to the counterpoint. Her stories do center around flawed characters making hard decisions and battling with a lot beyond their control with gripping, edge-of-your-seat action. But there's a light at the end of the tunnel, a writing decision inspired in part by the fairy tales of old and the idea of happily ever after. Everybody welcome author Michelle Miles to the show. Great to have you.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
No problem, no problem. So I'm sure you're familiar with the schism in fantasy writing. So tell me, what makes you choose happily ever after?
I really like stories about hope and love. So that's why I write those, especially the fairy tales. For me, it's just part of the story, and I love putting these two characters in conflict with either each other or the world or maybe both, and kind of seeing how they overcome all that to choose each other.
Right, right. And what kind of inspired you to start writing fantasy this way?
So I have always been I've loved fantasy. I've read it for most of my adult life, and
Mm-hmm.
I think the thing about fantasy to me is that I really love the world building. I love putting my characters in strange or magical situations. I like that aspect of exploring a new world in new ways and seeing how the characters kind of react to that. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's kind of how I picked it.
Right, right. And you got your dragons, you got your wizards, you got your mages,
Yes.
and these are just you can do so much. There's so much potential with it.
Right, yes, I love that. I love exploring those, and most of my books have some either supernatural element to them or magical element. I write a lot of right now I'm working on a dark paranormal romance series that is
Mm-hmm.
kind of darker than the fairy tales for sure. And I like to see how I can break my characters and put them back together, and I put them in these terrible situations. This series is about psychological warfare and trauma, so I'm really exploring those themes and how the characters can overcome that and what they do to choose each other over and over again. Because it's all about that to me. It's all about choosing each other and the ultimate devotion.
Yes, yes. So, in that sentiment, do you think fantasy world should reflect real life suffering?
I mean, I think it can. I think part of the thing about writing fantasy or reading fantasy, I mean, we all want to be entertained. We want that escapism, but I think it's kind of fun for me, to explore those different kind of themes, those darker themes, and the lighter themes too, about what makes a character pick their love interest. I mean, what is it? How do they react to each other? How do they overcome all of those obstacles to choose each other and be together?
Okay. And I mean that makes sense. I mean, because you got your beginning, then it really takes the reader on an emotional journey. And
Yes.
after an emotional journey of that heaviness, I don't know, you kind of just don't want to leave the readers like feeling like shit afterwards.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I really like to give that emotional payoff too at the end of the book. even if it's like, if it's a trilogy, it's a continuing story.
Mhm.
At the end of every book, so this trilogy I'm working on, it's the same 2 characters, but at the end of every book, they choose each other every single time. There is a happily ever after for them, but the story continues because there's an overarching story concept that runs through the 3 books. And so it's
Right,
all
right.
about how do they choose each other in the most dire situations, and, for the hero, he chooses to stay with her, and he's 100% devoted to her, and so that's kind of what I want to play with those themes and see if I keep putting them in these terrible situations, what happens? So it's really fun for me.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, why do you think there is this push for more realism and grittiness? I mean, you got a world with dragons and people in funny outfits, and now all of a sudden everybody wants you to be a historian or an economist.
It's entertaining, I think,
Mhm.
and I think it's relatable. I think we're all in tune with human emotions, right? So if we can relate to those characters no matter what situation they're in, I think it becomes sort of an emotional ride for us as a reader or even as an author. I mean, I'm not a plotter by any stretch of the imagination.
Mhm.
I like to sit down and kind of figure it out, and it's very surprising what the subconscious can plant along the way, and sometimes I do foreshadowing, and I don't even know that I'm doing it until later. But I think it's
Right.
relatable. I think people see themselves in characters and they understand, and that's what makes it so interesting and entertaining.
Right, right. And, something interesting about what you said is that you kind of figure things out as you go along,
Yeah.
which, I mean, how does that, like, I guess, how does that, like, evolve into a full story for you? And how are are the ideas flowing?
Yeah, so I usually start with a big idea, and then sometimes the character walks into my head and tells me the story, and so I kind of know what the high points are, right? So I may not know exactly where to start, but I kind of know what I want the story to be, and then I just sit down and start writing. And of course, there's some times where I have to stop and figure things out, like who the character is, and then there's other times where I absolutely know who the character is from the moment they step onto the page. And that's what's fun for me. I like that discovery writing. I like to sit down and figure out what's going to happen, and I do plot a little bit in my brain. I don't sit down and put it on paper. I like think about it a lot and try to visualize, if this happens, then what is the consequences of that, and how do they continue on with the story, and all of that. So it's really about a discovery for me, especially
Right,
with
right.
these fantasy books.
Right. And in my own writing, I often find myself doing a thing where, because I'm a big fantasy anime nerd, and I often find myself having to check myself with the main character always wins and everybody around them learns lessons thing. Like in a
Yeah.
story I'm working on now, I was going to do that. And then I had to backtrack because I was like, wait, this person winning here just doesn't make sense for the overall theme of the story. And while
Mhm.
yes, you want your main person to be powerful, you also want there to you also want the flow of the story to be the flow of the story. And I say all this to say that some dark fantasy authors have problems with the fact that, the way modern sort of lighter fantasy is, there's no real tension, there's no real stakes. So how do you keep readers on the edge of their seats?
Push my characters to the brink. Like, I literally break them and put them back together. For instance, in this series that I'm working on, it was a 5-book series. This is a spinoff. So she had her happy ending, we thought, at the end of that
Mhm.
book 5. But as I started thinking about, I really miss these characters. I'm like, I love them so much. How do I bring them back? How do I make the story interesting? How do I make it different? And the thing that popped into my head with the question that I wanted to answer over this whole 3-book trilogy was, what do you do when the person you love most is weaponized against you? And that was the whole premise.
Mm.
And so I sat down and I thought, okay, she is a powerful person. She has all of these abilities that happen to be basically burned out at the end of the last series. So I basically took her and said, "What happens to her when she doesn't have her powers anymore and she's been altered to become a weapon aimed at the one person that she would never intentionally hurt?" And so that's where I came up with that whole idea, and it evolved into psychological warfare and trauma and, I didn't intend to write that when I when I started. It just as I began the story and it literally just poured out of my head, it was like every day I knew what is the next scene and the next scene and the dialogue and what happens, and I thought, "Can I really write this? Is it's really too dark?" Because it's about a violation too. It's kind of stalking and that sort of thing. And then what does that happen? How does that happen to her, and what do they do? How do they react to that? And so I really sat down and thought about what that looks like on the page with these 2 characters that I have spent, years with, 5 books with. And I never really got into the hero's point of view because the 5 books are written in hers, and I thought, "I really wanna get into his head. I really wanna see what he's thinking, how he's feeling," and that was sort of the premise and why I started writing it the way I did, and I don't know if that answers your question, but that's how I ended up doing this whole series, was I really wanted to push those characters into a dark place and see how they would react and keep them together.
Right. It's the typical twisted author logic of "You're my babies, I love you. Now it's time to torture you."
You're right, exactly.
And that kind of brings up another question too, because I know that when you first created these characters, you had an idea of the types of situations they would face
Mhm.
and the type of situations that you were kind of maybe not, maybe that's a little. Did you ever have to backtrack on some of those sentiments?
For the first 5 books, I did. I really thought about, do I really wanna make it that ugly? Because the whole 5-book series is a little dark. She's a relic hunter. She goes after holy relics, and it's angels and demons and that kind of thing. And I never really pushed myself that hard on those. And then when I got to this trilogy, I thought, "Yeah, I'm just gonna go for it and see how I c how I can do it," and I hesitated with that. I mean, I thought about it for a long time. Do I really wanna do this? Do I really wanna go? And it just felt right for the characters and for the story, and so I wrote it. And then I decided, but I in my back of my mind, I was like, "Well, if I don't like it, I can always rewrite it."
Mhm.
But yeah, I think part of writing good fiction is knowing when to push your characters to the brink and how to break them and put them back together.
Right. When is when does it go too far, do you think?
I think that depends on the writer and maybe the reader. I mean, I think for me, I just knew that I really wanted to explore those darker themes, and but I didn't want it to be graphic violence. I didn't want it to be, I didn't want it to be gory. I didn't want it. So there's a very fine line for me as a writer. There was a very fine line on how do I write this, this ultimate violation, this mind altering without being gratuitous. And so I think for me, if I had gone a different route, it would have been too far. But I really wanted to put on the page the story of the characters, not the gore, not the violence, not the I mean, certainly there is that, but not the explicitness of it, if that makes sense.
Right. When so it's kinda like when the gore becomes more iconic than the actual
Yeah.
characters itself, then you've kinda messed up.
Right, for me, yes. Yeah, for me. I
Mhm.
don't I don't really put that in my books. And the fairy tales are totally different. The fairy tales are, they're light, they're hopeful. They're not really the dark stories that I'm working on now. And I think I like to mix it up. So I like to write the light, sweet romances, and then I like to stop and write something different. That's just how my brain
Right.
works.
Right. No, I definitely get you. And kind of branching off, I wanted to ask this kinda as a general thing. Do you think the idea of a happily ever after is an unrealistic idea?
In real life, maybe we don't often get our happily ever afters, but in fiction, and especially romance fiction, it's not a romance if it doesn't have a happy ending.
Right.
And so I know that there's a lot of people that are out there thinking they're writing romance, but if one of the main characters dies at the end, that's not a romance. Because for a romance to be what it is and to stay true to that genre, whatever subgenre you're writing of romance, it always has to have a happy ending or happy for now. And if it's a continuing story, a happy for now is totally fine. But for romance, yeah, for sure, it has to be happy ending.
Yep. And I know that there's because I know that some authors like to write their characters having psychological breaks and stuff like that. And I mean, that's fine. But if you're not putting those characters together, then that love ultimately, it just can't be compelling in a fiction sense.
Right. I mean, and I think for if you're writing that sort of psychological trauma, for me, for this book, it was about, decisions that were made. He, for instance, the male character, he stays and he tells her he's staying and he's because he's devoted to her no matter what, and he helps her overcome some of her trauma. And I really wanted to explore that theme, and it was really fun to write. I say fun. I'm dealing with dark themes, but it was really fun to explore that and see how they reacted to it and write that and make it and still make it romantic because that's what it is. It's still all about the devotion to each other and choosing each other no matter what.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think on that note, I was going to start this a little later, but honestly, I couldn't find a better way to kind of scooch in this segment. But with that, we've reached our halfway point, I guess. So it's time for our groove break. When we come back, we'll interrogate Michelle here just a little more and try to figure out, by the end, if fantasy should slam you back into reality or take you away from it, even if for a short time. You're watching What's Going On with Dapper Don. Stay tuned. You don't want to miss it.
I see it in your eyes, prophecy brought to life. Passion ignites your strike, hungry for justice, but I never believed in fate wrapped up so neat. Because when you are free, you rise above it. The time has arrived, you must prove yourself. Your friends nowhere by, no one here to help. The weight of this world, the hopes of them all, as chaos unfurls, tell me, will you stand tall? Do you hear the ringing? Do you feel it in your bones? The urge to be free, to challenge old thrones. That is the ringing of the hammer of justice. It strikes so clean. I'm the demise of every evil scheme. The hammer of justice, and though it swings slow, my power will glow until I save them all. to be free, to challenge old thrones. That is the ringing of the hammer of justice. It strikes so clean. I'm the demise of every evil scheme. The hammer of justice, and though it swings slow, my power will glow until I save them all. Draw near, but I do not feel fear. I had my time, now yours is here. A hammer, axe, or spear, weapons must never steer, unless the hand that wields is shaky and unclear. So I beg you, young lass, as I kick your ass, don't let your moment pass. Are you up to the task? Do you hear the ringing? Do you feel it in your bones? The urge to be free, to challenge old thrones. That is the ringing of the hammer of justice. It strikes so clean. I'm the demise of every evil scheme. The hammer of justice, and though it swings slow, my power will glow until I save them all. Hammer of justice, it rests on you. Will you do what you need to do? The hammer of justice, and though it swings slow, your power will glow until you save them
You're tuned in to What's Going On with Dapper Don. Don't touch that dial. We're back. For those of you just tuning in, I've been sort of relentlessly grilling Michelle here about how she handles her writing versus how the other darker authors handle theirs. Now I want to talk about kind of the genre as a whole and some other themes that I noticed. So I want to dive a little bit deeper into the love triumphing overall, because a big theme I see in your work is that love and emotion seems to be a driving force in a lot of your character decisions. Why go this route instead of like the cold rationality that darker projects go to?
It's a great question. Think I just really love to see 2 people come together despite all the odds, and, love triumphs all, right? I
Hmm.
really like writing those types of stories, and I have written them for so long, I don't know that I could write anything else, because every time I try to write just a straight fantasy, there's always a romance.
Right, right. I will say writing a romance comes off to me like it's a little bit harder than writing a normal story because with a normal story, you can kind of throw your characters into the ringer, but with romance you kind of have to slow down and readers can feel when you're trying to rush through it or if the characters aren't necessarily they don't have real chemistry because that's more of an emotional genre than like action or adventure where it's really just suspense the whole way through.
Yeah, I mean, I still write action adventure too. I mean, there's always
Mhm.
that in my book. I just like to layer that with I really like writing slow burn attraction type books. So I really like it. It's a will they or won't they through the whole book. And it can be anything. I don't write the really spicy stuff. I would say it's more steamy in some of the cases. Now the fairy tales are all sweet romance. They're all young
Right.
adult 14 and up, so it's just, very sweet romance, but I really like those that sort of feel good, falling in love feeling. I mean, I think that's just a human emotion that we all just can relate to, and it's really fun for me to write.
Right. I mean, it could also be because you're a masochist and enjoy challenging yourself way too much,
I
but
do.
sure, we'll go with the first one. I've been talking to a lot of authors and they have said that, real older adult love is a lot more subtle and a lot less overt than what you see in media today. But what do you think of that sentiment in terms of a story?
I think when you reach a certain age, like I have,
Mhm.
you really wanna see those stories that are with maybe older heroes and heroines where, maybe it's a second chance love, it's a missed opportunity that comes back around. I think because when you're older, you wanna still see that. I do, I'm speaking for myself. I still wanna see that. And it doesn't matter to me if the characters are in their 20s or 30s or whatever. Love is love, right? And so I just
Right,
really
right.
wanna see those types of stories. I wanna read those types of stories, I wanna write those types of stories, and I want to think that no matter what age you are, that is something we can all relate to. We all have those feelings. We know what it feels like to fall in love. We know that feeling of, "Gosh, I really like that person. I hope they like me back," you
Yes.
know?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. And honestly, that's what I was going to ask you next was is the way that you write these things inspired by a time in your life when love took you through the fire but, you know, came out on the other side?
Yeah, I think we've all been there, right?
Mhm.
We've all had those terrible breakups and heartbreaks, and I think for me, I wanna write that sort of escapism. I want to have those characters find each other no matter what, and I think, there's it's just a fun thing to be able to sit and figure out how they can get through whatever they're getting through in the story to choose each other in the end and fall in love.
Right, right. And I mean, do you think it's healthy for people to be exposed to this kind of love even if others say it might be unrealistic?
I think so. I mean, I make a living on it, so
Right,
I mean,
right. I would hope so.
I want people to read my books and go, "Man, that was a really good book," and I really liked it because there's always there's that happy ending. It's about, that hope. I'm gonna go back to that again. It's about hope and, finding that one person who really gets you, I think I think that's what we're all looking for. We're looking for that one person in our life who understands who we are deep down underneath all the crazy and all of the everything that we've experienced, all of our baggage, and it doesn't matter. They love you anyway. And I think that's what I love about these books.
Absolutely, absolutely. And now I wanna talk about kind of you know, what makes fantasy in general just good. Dark fantasy, light fantasy, any fantasy. I know you said that fantasy should be an escape, but do you think people are also served in some way being aware of the darkness that plagues us? I know that your stories touch on that a lot as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, this it's all relatable, right? I mean, I think for me, fantasy is all about the world building and how do you make it interesting and what are the rules and I don't always consciously go in and say, okay, I'm going to write this fantasy book and my world is going to be where the magic has these sort of XYZ rules. I don't do that. I go in and I'm like I said, I'm a discovery writer. So I go in and
Right.
I let the world tell me what it needs, and sometimes that involves a lot of revision. Sometimes it just really works out um I think darker themes serve a purpose. I mean, we understand the darkness. We're in a very difficult time right now, and I think even with darker fantasy, it's still an escapism. It's still a way for us to find a glimmer of entertainment and fun and hope in different stories, even if it is a darker theme.
Right, right. It's just kinda like we have been taken in the last 5, 6 years, we've been taken through the ringer just as a
Yeah,
species in general. So I
right.
think at least 1 or 2 projects where it's just like, we're gonna we're gonna take you down and then we're gonna bring you back up because the
Yeah,
world's not doing it, that's
exactly.
helpful.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the reasons why I started writing fairy tales too was because I had finished up that dark 5-book dark paranormal romance
Mhm.
series, and I was ready for something new and light and different. And I wrote 9 books in 2 years because I really loved the premise and the stories, and they're all in a connected world, so you can read them in any order, but I also still love writing the darker stuff because that's just some type of story that still speaks to me, especially with these 2 characters that I love so much. And being able to revisit them has been a blast. I love it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, I wanna talk about your world building process for a second because you said something interesting. You said you let the world tell you what it needs. So
Yeah.
how much of that is research and how much of that is, well, these rules go along and they help this story, so I'm going to put this in. I'm not gonna put in a bunch of extra shit that I'm never gonna get to in the story.
That's a great question. When I started my fairy tale series, it's called Enchanted Realms, and I
Mhm.
did think about it for a long time before I actually sat down and wrote book 1. I actually mapped out the first 10 books. I knew each book would be in a different realm. I made a map. Um, but the map evolves with every book I write, and every story has its own sort of little ecosystem, right? It's just, but they're all
Right.
connected. One of the things I love doing is being able to plant Easter eggs in these later books that call back to the earlier books. And so
Mm.
I like to sit and think about, the bigger world and how it's connected and what are the rules and, how do these characters interact if they're in different realms? How would they interact with other characters in other realms? And so I like to sit and think about that. I think a lot about this for a lot of time.
Right.
But yeah, I think, it all evolves as I write. And whether it's in, book 1 or book 10, the rules stay the same, but the world changes in that there's different characters that are living there now. They have their own set of rules. Magic. I don't know if you've ever watched Once Upon a Time, but magic always comes with a price, as Rumpelstiltskin
Yeah,
says. And
I'm
it's true.
familiar.
Yeah, so I think we want to adhere to that with especially if you're dealing with magic systems. What is the cost of magic? What is the price? And I like to really explore that too. And so but I like to have those all of those stories, interconnected in some way and I do like to plant the Easter eggs.
Absolutely. Before this episode, I take a scan. I usually take a scan through authors' reviews before I make an episode on them because I like to see what the readers are thinking. And
Dear.
people are getting really hooked on your stories, like dangerously so. But they seem to share the same sentiment where it's like at first they did not like the decisions that the main leads were making.
Yeah.
So was that a purposeful move for you?
In some ways, yeah. I mean, I have a couple of characters that do things that readers didn't like, but in the end, they redeem themselves. I mean, that's what it's all about. Like, maybe he's a bad guy at the beginning, or you think he is, but he's not. He's just he's operating from his own or her their own you know drive, their own goals, their own whatever, and so I get a lot of people love the Enchanted Realms. They love the fairy tales. They're waiting for fairy tales. I've got to get back on
Yeah.
that. But yeah, I think it's interesting reading the reviews and seeing the different, take on things. Like when I wrote the first fairy tale was a Cinderella retelling, and one
Right.
of the reviews was like, "This is a mix of Wizard of Oz and Cinderella," and I was like, "Well, I guess it kind of is."
What the hell did you do?
Her slippers are magic, and so, there's an evil wicked witch slash queen, and I after I read that review and I thought about it, I was like, they're kind of right. That is I didn't know I did that. See, that's the kind of thing that I do that I didn't realize I did. And so it's kind of fun. And that
Wow.
evil queen will be making another appearance in another book at some point. So yeah.
I mean, I hope she does because Cinderella's a pretty. I'm not gonna say it's uneventful, but it's like it doesn't really get to the scale of Wizard of Oz. So
You know,
you being able to
yeah,
bridge that gap.
and it was an accident, it was total accident, but my whole thought for that story was, what if Cinderella fell in love with a prince from another realm? And that's where that came from, and so she's whisked off to the Christmas realm, and she has to essentially save the spirit of Christmas. And,
Mm,
her slippers are magic, and, even though they were in the original fairy tale, they were magic basically given to her by the fairy godmother. But in this story, they actually do have magic. And so the evil queen wants them for herself. So that was the fun part of writing that and then sort of discovering I tried to pick and choose the elements from the most familiar fairy tales and reuse them and twist them in my own way. And that's what I try to do. And so, like for my Beauty and the Beast retelling, she's a scribe. She can read magical languages, and the Beast is a prince who is a shapeshifter. And so she has to transcribe a magical enchanted book to break the curse. And so that's where I came up with
wow.
that idea. And it was a lot of fun to write. And that's one of my more popular
Right.
books, actually.
And if I'm familiar with magical scribes, I believe that their ability to create documents that are that powerful evolves with training and research and experience, right?
She has a gift that she can just read these magic languages, she can translate them, but when she gets this book, she can't read it, and so she has to figure it out, and that's how she has to break the curse for the prince.
Okay, that makes sense. Honestly, like all of these just sound like awesome premises. I do have to ask because I was thinking about this when I was looking at the fairy tale inspiration. What do you think of the original Brothers Grimm tales?
I think a lot of them are really dark and gross.
Oh God.
If you've ever read them, I mean, when I was researching, which fairy tales are I mean, they're eating children, they're killing people, it's like, these are fairy tales?
They can't fit their feet in the slippers. They're cutting off their
Right,
toes and
they're cutting off toes. Yeah, it's very violent, some of these, and so I didn't wanna Disneyfy mine, I
mhm.
wanted to do something different, but I also wanted to keep it, not that. So,
Yeah.
I really that's when I sat down and went, "What if these are just young adult sweet romances?" And they can appeal to the younger crowd too, and, I mean, I read young adult, I'm just gonna say it, I read young adult, so I just felt like that these books could appeal to a wider audience if I kept them, light-hearted, sweet, fun. I mean, there is some a little bit of darkness in 'em. I did oppose, the Raven retelling, that's a dark gothic ghost story, and that was a lot of
Yes.
fun.
That was
That's one
made
of my
by,
favorite books.
Edgar Allan Poe, right? The
Yes. Yeah,
chop
so
you
they're
up
not
and stick you in the floorboards guy.
right, that guy, he was a wackadoo, but I didn't, I didn't really want to go that way, but
Mhm.
the story kind of lent itself to it. And for these Enchanted Realms, they're not all fairy tale per se. I have plans to do a retelling of like A Midsummer's Night's Dream and
Hmm,
Robin Hood and things like that. So I want to do a little bit of different things with that series, and they're all still connected um, in this Enchanted Realms world.
I see, I see. Wow. So, like, a story like trying to think, how would you do Little Red Riding Hood then?
I did do Little Red Riding Hood, and, it's a
You did?
novella.
Okay.
It is. It's a novella. It's Once Upon an Ancient Curse where Red Riding Hood is a huntress
Mhm.
hunting the direwolf who's been terrorizing the village, and yeah, and so that's her story that will be getting a sequel later on, hopefully this year. So, yeah, she has to hunt the direwolf that has been terrorizing the village, and her cloak is magic, of course, and so, yeah, that's the story. I don't wanna give too much
Okay.
away.
No, I definitely get it. We don't this isn't a spoiler show, but, I do have a question in regards to what would make you drop a book and just never pick it up again? I know you've had those experiences reading.
Boy, I have, yes. Characters that are irritating. Characters that I think the writing has to be engaging. I try to give a book, 100 pages or so before I say I can't finish it. It's all about the story. How engaging is the story? How are the characters behaving? You don't want those characters for me. I need to kind of feel something for them. I need to feel like I'm
Mhm.
connected to them in a way, and I need to be invested in their story. And if I'm probably not going to finish the book.
Right. And, it's a powerful move when an author decides to do something on purpose, right?
Yeah.
So, like, if a character is irritating on purpose and the story is treating them like they're irritating, that's
Yes.
one thing. But if
Right.
they're accidentally irritating and the story is treating them like they're God's gift to humankind,
Yeah.
it's a little too close to real life.
Right, right. I mean, I don't wanna read stuff like that, and so I have to be hooked in, like, in the first, couple of chapters, and if I'm still
Right,
not really hooked, I'll give it some more time, but, um, I've stopped reading about halfway through a lot of books. Again, I keep thinking, "Is something gonna happen? It's gotta get better." It doesn't, and so then I give up.
right. What is the worst published book by by a, I guess, nationally recognized author?
I don't wanna say. There's some very, very popular fantasy fiction out there right now. It's not for me, but people love it, and I love that they love it. I love that they're reading. We want people to read. That's why we do this job. We want people to read, and we want
Yes.
them to be entertained. Fiction is very subjective. One person may hate this book that I love, and vice versa.
Right.
And, I know my books are not for everybody. Um, and that's okay. You're certainly entitled to your opinion,
Absolutely.
but, it's just if it's not your thing, it's not your thing. I mean, that's
Yeah.
really what it boils down to.
Damn it, I thought I was gonna get you to drop some fire on the I thought we were gonna get into it. I was ready to beef with George R. R. Martin, but I guess it's
Okay,
never.
well, I I have read those books. They're very, very long, and he has a lot of characters, and I don't think that we'll ever see the end of that series in fiction form and book form.
Nope, not as long as they're gonna keep adapting them into HBO
Yeah,
shows.
yeah,
But,
exactly.
speaking of, I do wanna talk more in depth about the industry. First, in your publishing journey, what were some of the most important lessons you did have to learn?
That it's a marathon, not a sprint, and that branding is really, really important. Finding my author voice was really, really important. I think those are the hardest lessons to learn when you're struggling to write, and it took me a long time to figure out what my author voice was and
Right.
my branding. So, now that I kinda know that, I do know that, I know what kind of writer I am, what kind of books I wanna write. I have basically 2 lanes. I have the Michelle Mal's dark romance, fantasy, whatever, that's adult fiction on one side, and then I have the fairy tales that are sweet, light, fun. I just wrote a cozy fantasy that is light and sweet and funny, and I'm planning to do another series later this year that is another cozy romance set in Charleston about witches. So I'm working on that, and so I think for me, the hardest lesson to learn was know who I was as a writer, know what my author voice was, and my branding.
What's so like when you learned yourself as a writer, did that just help you kind of categorize, yourself in general? Because I know that self discovery happens when you kind of lean in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, once I figured out what are my genres and stop trying to chase the market, because I'm not a right to market kind of person. I can't do it. I need to write what speaks to me and what is entertaining and fun for me. And once I figured out what my genres were, where I was going to be focusing on, it just sort of opened the dam and I was able to start, writing, you know, faster and I understood my process better and yeah, I think it really helped me understand, what I was trying to achieve.
Right, right. And the beauty of that is that, yeah, a lot of authors starting out, they try to fit into a certain mold because,
Mhm.
you don't start as an author for no reason. There's an author that you
Right.
like that you want to, but then when you stop to think, and you start like, well, I'm doing my own thing. Now all of a sudden the characters make sense, the world's starting to pop out of your head, and
Mhm.
it's it's really quite an amazing process to watch.
It is, and I think once I figured all that out, I redid my website, I launched a direct store, and it helped me when I was going through the redesign process, I hired someone to help me with that, and she was fantastic, and she helped me figure out, what my branding should look like, what my logo should look like, and that really helped me focus on not only my branding, but my fiction too, and so that was really important to me, and I love
Right,
the end result.
absolutely. Yes. Now, with the advent of social media has come some discourse on previously established genres. Do you think that social media has made people more cynical with their tastes, especially in the fantasy genre?
That's a really good question. I don't know. I post on social media quite a bit. I follow a lot of authors. I don't really see any of that.
Mhm.
I try to just kind of keep my head down and I don't TikTok. I don't do TikTok. I do
Okay.
at all. I used to and then I was like I don't have time for it.
Do you
So,
hear it? She's free.
So you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and YouTube. Those are the primary places that you'll see me posting. But yeah, that's a good question. I don't think I have a good answer for that.
Wow. Well, that's a what's going on with Dapper Don first, folks. I asked a question that the person didn't have an answer for. Man, that's I'm definitely going to have to clip this one. But tell me, as a final question, and this is kind of a really important one, and it just kind of makes or breaks this interview, really. If you could be teleported into one already existing fantasy franchise, where would you go?
Ooh, that's a fun question. Middle Earth.
Middle Earth.
Yeah, Middle Earth.
Wow.
I want to live in Rivendell.
That's God damn. Okay. So that's a real good one. That's peak. That's peak. Do you have any final thoughts for our listeners?
I hope that if you read my books, you like them and enjoy them and are entertained.
Absolutely. And if when they're ready to go ahead and get dangerously hooked on something, where can they find your work? And where do you recommend them starting?
They can start okay, so I'm everywhere. I'm Michelle Miles author at
Mhm.
Instagram, Facebook, Threads. I am Michelle Miles Books on YouTube. You can find my website at michellemiles.net. You can find my direct store at michellemilesbooks.com. And then if you sign up for my newsletter, you get a free novella to start your journey into the Enchanted Realms with Once Upon an Ancient Curse, which is the Red Riding Hood retelling. If you are interested in the fairy tale retellings, you can start there with Once Upon a Midnight Clear, which is the Cinderella retelling in book one. If you are interested in a little bit darker themes and you like angels, demons, action, adventure, and slow burn romance, you can get hooked on the Dreamwalker universe with book one. You can actually sign up and get on my website. Before the Dark is the prequel novella that will lead you right into book one, Call of the Dark. And then I will be launching a spin-off series in September that continues the story with a trilogy. So that's where you can find
Absolutely.
me.
Of course. She's gonna microdose you before you get fully addicted.
That's right.
Well, it was great having you, Michelle.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
Absolutely. I mean, I would hope so. I don't have a show where I'm torturing my guests yet, so.
Well, it
But
was a
anywho,
pleasure.
of course, of course. But anywho, that's all for today's show. If you like this episode, don't forget to like and subscribe. My socials and Michelle's website, where you can find her work and sort of get immersed in that, will be linked in the description, as well as who helped put this episode together. Follow us everywhere so you don't miss a beat, and tune in next Sunday at 6:30 p.m. for an all-new What's Going On with Dapper Don. You don't want to miss what I have in store. Peace out.